I'd like to welcome in a longtime GRE podcast listener, listening since 2015, Christian Montalvo. She's based in Dallas, Fort Worth. And wait till you hear about what she and her husband are doing in real estate investing. And despite all this, she made time to be on the show today. And, you know, it was Benjamin Franklin, I think he was the one attributed to saying that if you want something done, ask a busy person, because the busier the people are, the better they manage their time. Christian, welcome to the show.
Hi, Keith. Thank you so much for having me. I am totally fangirling right now. So this is such an honor to be on here.
Yeah. Now, when we have these listener guests, I haven't always met them in person. Of course, I met you in person when we did an informal meetup in Dallas, Fort Worth in 2019. So that helped you stand out when a number of listener guests wrote in, because I really want to talk more to you. Interestingly, it was the year 2015 when you started listening to the show, and that's when you had been working an employee job, a W-2 job, for about 18 months. And I know it was a night shift job. So just tell us about where you were then and how you progressed from there as that employee.
Yeah, I started my W-2 career after going to grad school, and I was basically a food microbiologist. So shocker, I had nothing to do with real estate, had nothing to do with investment real estate. But yeah, I was working third shift, traveling around, basically doing like audits and compliance for a company that cleans food processing plants. And so I would spend a lot of time in the car by myself and at night and trying to stay awake. And I would listen to podcasts. And a really good friend of mine named Jacob Ayers, who also has a podcast, and you know him, he was telling me, we were both kind of in the same story. He was working a lot in Houston. We had graduated around the same time. And he said, you got to check out this podcast. You're going to love it. You know, it talks a lot about, you know, we had already been kind of even though we had only been working for 18 months, we're like, man, working W-2 where it can be a real grind. Like, is this really what we want to do for the next 30 years of our lives? And he was like, check out this podcast. It talks all about the things that, you know, we've talked about. And yeah, I listened to that first podcast of yours that talked about house hacking, and it just blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing how somebody could get a house, low down payment, live in it, have someone else pay the mortgage, and then continue to just grow a portfolio that way. It really, really impressed me.
Yeah, there actually is an alternate way to one trading their time for dollars in a job that they're often not passionate about, somewhat soullessly then, and doing that in perpetuity. There is an alternative. So what was your living situation like then, Christian? Were you a renter, or had you owned any property yet by 2015? Or?
Yeah, I had just been a renter. My husband and I, we had just barely gotten married. And we were living in a tiny apartment in DFW, paying almost $1,000 a month. And it was just insane. It was also one of my first times I had to like really pay for rent. I always kind of figured out a way to like live with family members and live really cheap, or do jobs in high school as an RA to cover my rent. So paying this almost $1,000 a month was just like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe, how do people live like this? How do you ever save money? And it was nothing. It was like $1,000 a month. But at that moment, I heard the podcast and immediately started scheming, got home from that business trip, told my husband, like, we are changing up our strategy. We are going to continue living here as long as we can, saving as much money as we can. And we're going to go find a small multifamily and like a duplex and live in one side, and somebody's going to live in the other, and they're going to pay the whole mortgage. And he was like, huh? Okay, that kind of sounds like what we did in college, you know? And I was like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we're just going to do it over and over and over and over again until we don't have to work anymore. And he was like, what? This sounds like it's going to take a million years. And I mean, we are still both working our W-2 jobs, but we did continue to do it multiple times. And it's really, really changed our lives, just having those little stepping stones of building that income semi-passively with these investment properties.
Yeah, so tell us about that first purchase and then building from there.
Yeah, so about 8 months from the time that we discussed, we were ready. We had our 3.5% down. We utilized an FHA loan.
Just how I started.
Yep, I knew exactly what I was looking for. I remember the duplex. I had an agent, but I found it myself because I knew exactly what I wanted to find. I was looking for that 1% rule, which is hard to do in DFW now, but back then you could do it. And yeah, we jumped in. It was a $200,000 3-bed, 2-bath duplex. We felt like we were living in a mansion compared to our 1-bed, 1-bath apartment. And it was crazy. We moved in and we were one of kind of some of our first friends to buy a house, but the people that were buying like normal single family homes.
Right.
And they were like, what's your mortgage payment on this? And I'm like, oh, we're paying like barely $500 a month because the tenants on the other side are covering majority of the mortgage.
Yeah.
And so that was a big little, like that little bit nugget, it wasn't even that, it was a big financial change from $950 to $500 a month, but it just really like inspired us mentally to keep going. And we knew that like this was something we could do and continue replicating.
Yeah. And some people still aren't aware that you can use an FHA loan, which is a 3.5% minimum down payment program on a single family home, duplex, triplex, or fourplex. Fourplex is the most number of doors you can get with an FHA loan. And in general, you need to live in one of the units yourself at least 12 months, that being your owner occupied period. And your minimum credit score, last time I checked, just needs to be 580. The higher the credit score you have, the lower the mortgage interest rate you're going to have, of course. Okay, so this is a very organic way of starting out with an FHA 3.5% down, owner-occupied duplex. So you're using a lot of leverage there. That can be a good thing as long as you're able to control the mortgage. And then where did you and your husband grow from there?
Yeah, and the plan was we knew we had to live in it for a year. So we set the clock for a year, saved as much as possible for that year. At the 1 year mark, I called up a broker and said, hey, I want to look into refinancing my house and getting out of this FHA. And he was like, oh, congratulations. What's your plan after that? Because he saw that we were living in a duplex. I go, oh, well, I'm going to utilize FHA again to go find another one. And so I remember at the time, in that time period of that year, we had a baby and I wasn't even cleared to drive. And I walked with my baby in a stroller to the bank to go. It was more like I needed to get out, like not like I was like the sad mom, but I walked with him outside to the bank and I was like, I need to talk to someone about mortgages and my loan. And yeah, they got me set up. And at the 1 year mark, the property had went up enough that we were able to refinance into conventional. And then we pretty much started looking again. It took a few more months to find that next one, but the next one we actually utilized FHA for a fourplex. And it was funny because we kind of went backwards in size. We went from a 3-bed, 2-bath, lots of space. Our cats had their own room to we moved into a 1-bedroom, 1-bath with our baby. And that was a little tight, but that move really changed things. That was a big sacrifice for us because we went from paying $500 a month out of pocket to pay for a mortgage to once we had that other side rented out. And then in this fourplex where 3 out of the 4 units were rented out, we actually started cash flowing. Everything was paying for itself. And we were cash flowing over $1,000 a month after all expenses were paid. So that little change in, a year, making the change mentally, even just shy of 2 years prior, really started to just do a big wave of change for us.